wheat anymore, you know, all the things you could grow and produce yourself on the farm to sustain and feed a family. My parents had to go and find work. 6 of my siblings were sent to live with other families, and 6 of us stayed with our parents, and I was the oldest of those 6 that stayed.
Being the oldest of that half of the siblings, Sofia essentially helped raise them. Looking out and caring for others would be a constant defining trait in her life. After graduating high school, Sofia got married. It was the late 1980s. She decided to move in with her husband into a small home in the Ituzaingó Annex neighborhood of Córdoba, originally built for Fiat auto plant workers. Being at the city's edge, it bordered vast agricultural lands. For Sofia, the neighborhood brewed nostalgia.
Es que sí, añorábamos siempre el regresarnos.
I always yearned to return to the countryside, and well, living in Ituzaingó was like going back. The fields were just a block away from my house, but of course it wasn't the same as my childhood home in San Luis.
Devuélveme, devuélveme, mi pastorcita perdida.
Yo cuando llegué había frutales.
When I first moved to the area, some of the land was used to grow different fruit trees, and the other fields were for growing watermelon that was used in candies. The people that lived in the neighborhood were working class folk.
At the time, the neighborhood, made up of simple single-story concrete homes, had a population of around 5,000 people.
That's where I had my children. I didn't work, but I used to paint. I would paint on canvas and glass and give painting classes to the neighborhood children at the local elementary and secondary schools. I used to paint still lifes of fruit and everything that was green.
Sofia lived a quiet and calm life in Ituzaingó. After having a son, she and her husband were planning on having a second child. They assumed that living close to the farmlands was good for their children. They would learn that they were wrong.
I don't paint anymore. I now only live for the fight.
Me dedico a luchar.
Soon the colors, literally and figuratively, in Sofia's life would fade away. That diversity of fruit trees and crops in the nearby fields that inspired Sofia's vibrant still life paintings and fomented the nostalgia of her rural early childhood had gone through a dramatic shift. By the mid-1990s, almost all of the farmlands surrounding Ituzaingó and broadly throughout Argentina were now monoculture. A kaleidoscope of tones were now just solid dark green. Soybean production was the driving agricultural force in the country. It was boosted by high demand and high yields, sustained through the genetic modification of seeds and the heavy use of agrochemicals and pesticides.
O sea, nosotros vivíamos cerca del campo de soja.
I used to live near the soybean fields, like 50 meters or so, and the kids would play in those fields. I thought living next to a farm was great. It gave you a kind of freedom, but later I found out that it had consequences, and that's when we started to get sick.
Sofia was pregnant with her second child. It was to be a girl named Nandi. Yet 8 months into the pregnancy, doctors detected a problem with the unborn baby's kidneys.
Ya sabía que tenía un problema.
I knew that she had a problem, but they said they could operate on her and that she would be fine.
Un embarazo normal.
It was a normal pregnancy and everything seemed okay.
The doctors told Sofia that they would operate on Nandi immediately after birth. She was rushed to an operating room, but 3 days passed and Sofia had no update on her newborn. Anxiety morphed into despair.
A mi hija fue algo muy difícil porque no lo sabía.
It was very difficult. I was waiting for them to bring her to me. I was still in the hospital. They finally brought her to me and they said, "Here's your daughter," and kind of shoved her on me. I held her and she was warm, but she was dead. And they left her with me, left her in my arms, dead.
Y me la dejaron mal. Me dejaron un abrazo.
They gave us a white box with a little dress. That's how it was done back then, nothing like today. They would give you your dead child. You would drive home with the baby in your arms and bury it. They gave me my baby girl. It's hard for me to talk about this, but they gave me baby girl, and I took her home and I buried her.
Me dio a mi hija y la llevé y la enterré.
Understandably, Sophia was distraught. Grief paralyzed her, and for weeks she was unable to leave her house. She was simply submerged in her tears. She hadn't thought about the cause of Nandy's kidney failure until a neighbor came to visit.
Y estaba en el frente, me había puesto a llorar y
Doña Grifo came by, and she said she knew I lost my baby. And she encouraged me to go out so that I wouldn't wallow away in my sorrow. And then she said that it was strange, quite unusual that I lost my baby, and for some reason that stuck with me. It made me think.
Y eso me hizo pensar un poquito. De ahí empecé, pasaba una maestra.
It was around the same time that I began to see another neighbor, a teacher, walk by the house every day, wearing a white handkerchief. And one day I stopped her and I asked her, why do you wear that thing in your head? And she told me that she had cancer. And that's when it hit me, when I snapped out of it all.
Sophia wondered if her newborn's unusual death and the teacher's cancer was not a coincidence, but rather an indication of a bleak pattern in Ituzaingó.
Porque yo veía muchas mamás que pasaban.
I started to see so many mothers pass by the house wearing those handkerchiefs, and their children wearing surgical masks. I knew those mothers were bold because of a reaction to cancer treatments and chemotherapy, and their children with their masks were also taking chemo. So when I saw this pattern, I started going to every house on the block, asking each neighbor how many people in their family were ill and what kind of illnesses they had.
Y cuando iba al frente, por ejemplo, Susana me dice, pero abusa, ¿qué es?
The woman who lived across the street said she lost her child too. She also received the same white burial box. The house next door had the same story and the same white box. Just on our block alone, we discovered that 5 or 6 children had died of different illnesses.
The grim reality Sophia began to perceive all around her filled her with raw emotion that sparked a fire. She became unshakably determined to find out why so many people in Ituzaingó were ill and dying. So she expanded her door knocking to almost every block in the neighborhood.
Pero cuando voy a una casa te decían, no, Sofía, andate allá.
Each time I went to a new house, someone would tell me about another neighbor and another family with sick people. They'd say, oh, go to this house and you will find a 23-year-old who has this type of cancer. Or go to that house and you will find that the grandmother has tumors. And as I went to visit those families, they began to join me, and soon we formed a group of mothers.
Empezó a formar el grupo de madres.
They would become known as the Mothers of Ituzaingó. They would meet up at each other's houses, gather information on their illnesses, and plan actions to identify what was making them sick, to stop it, and hold those responsible accountable. They pondered a range of theories. Could it have been chemicals from the electrical grid, lead piping, industrial pollution, or the monoculture practices from the lush green soybean fields?
Sí, no sabíamos si eran
At first, we had no idea what was making us sick. We didn't know if it was PCB, polychlorinated biphenyl, from the electrical transformers. We didn't even know that glyphosate existed. If the illness was coming from the soybean fuels fumigation, we didn't know if it was something in the water. But all those doubts we started to write down as a list, and we began to look for an expert in those areas to gather as much information as we could and really learn about these things.
In their shared anxiety, grief, and rage, they would also form a tight bond and find solace in solidarity.
pero sí nos organizamos. Había mamás de...
We had to be organized. There were some mothers who couldn't fully participate because of their illnesses. They had to travel to get their chemo treatments or stay in the hospital for several days. So we would organize money donations, raffles, and sell bread. We were all humble, working class people. We did what we could with the little we had.
En el barrio había una sola computadora.
In the neighborhood, there was only one computer. When I began carrying out my survey, I met a woman whose name is Beatriz. She heard that I was going around doing this and said that she would help me. that I could use her computer to combine all the data. And that's when we mapped out our findings of who was sick, with what, and where.
Y ponerlos en un mapa y ubicarlos.
This map would be a turning point for the women.
Así. Bueno, este es el mapa de Barrio Ituzaingó.
This is the original map here, which we, the mothers of Ituzaingó, made some 23 years ago.
And can you just describe the map a little bit? What are we looking at here?
Si ustedes ven, tenemos la única entrada acá por la ruta 9.
You can see here on the map the neighborhood. You can see soybean fields here to the north, east and south of Ituzaingó. The red circles indicate someone who had cancer, and the red and black circles represent someone who died of their illness. Look, here is what I used to live on this main street. Here, look, I lived just about 50 meters from the soybean fields.
Fíjate, estoy a 50 metros de Camposa.
Through mapping out their survey and seeing the visual representation of those ill in the community, the mothers of Ituzaingó were astonished at what they discovered. They calculated that the cancer rate in their neighborhood was 41 times higher than the national average.
No te das cuenta, nosotros estábamos viviendo en un barrio contaminado.
You know, at first, you just don't realize the dimension of the problem. We were living in a polluted neighborhood with a ton of people sick with cancer, leukemia, and we just didn't realize what was going on. We didn't realize.
Porque no te das cuenta.
The map clearly supported a growing suspicion that the potential cause of the illnesses in the neighborhood was coming from the expansive dark green fields where their children would play.
Cuando logramos que
When we looked at the map, we realized that the people who were most sick lived closest to the soybean fields.
sobre campo de soja.
The mothers sounded the alarm.
Hicimos todo legal porque
We took the legal route first. We went to the authorities, but they said we needed environmental studies. Some accused us of being there just to get money. We felt that they didn't take us seriously, so we decided to go out to the streets and protest. We realized we had to confront power.
¿Por qué no enfrentarnos con el poder?
Gracias, queridas madres, por permitirme hoy marchar con ustedes. Soy de Barrio Ituzaingó Anexo, parte de un grupo de...
We went out and blocked the streets. We held signs that said, "We are sick with cancer, help us." This is when the authorities finally reacted and they came to the neighborhood and did analysis on the water. They told us that our water was basically poisoned.
The plumbing was cut and water tanker trucks were dispatched to the neighborhood, yet that was only a temporary solution. Cause of contamination had yet to be determined, and Sofia and the mothers felt they were still not being taken seriously, and soon found themselves making enemies within the neighborhood.
Nos decían la loca, porque en el barrio nos decían la loca y enfrentado vecinos contra vecinos.
People started calling us crazy. Neighbors were being pitted against each other. Sometimes we would organize meetings at the neighborhood sports field, and we would invite all the neighbors to attend to explain to them what we were suffering from, to inform them of what we had discovered, because this wasn't just a struggle for us mothers, but rather something that impacted the whole neighborhood. But local authorities would show up and accuse us of causing property values to drop. People were paid to come and insult us. They wouldn't let us speak. They even threw oranges at us.
Entonces yo me iba a comprar
Not enough to stop Sofia and the mothers.
y las otras medidas eran
We knew that we were drinking poisoned water, and that poison came from the fields. So anytime we saw a spraying tractor, we called them mosquitoes, dousing the fields, we would go out there and block the machine.
dice, los vengan, decía, con armas. Vengan, dice, acá no es propiedad privada, no pueden entrar. Vengan, vengan.
Armed guards would often come out and taunt us, telling us, "Come over here, come over," knowing that we would be trespassing. And on other occasions, groups of men would show up with machetes, waving the blades around and gesturing us to get closer. They would drop their pants and show us their private parts.
Nos decían y se bajaban los pantalones y nos mostraban. Entonces, una vez cuando nos hicieron eso, fuimos a buscar hombres.
So the next time, we brought men from our neighborhood to help us block the machines. We had 5 or 6 guys come with us. But when those men showed up with their machetes, the men we invited left. So we women decided to stay and stop the machines ourselves.
Sofia says that even though men, women, young and old, were getting sick in the neighborhood, that it was the mothers who were decisive in taking action. She says instead of being supported by their husbands, the protesting women were often denigrated or talked down to with misogynistic attitudes.
El marido no participaba. Y tampoco le contábamos, porque como no estaba.
Our husbands didn't really participate, and we actually didn't tell them all that we were doing. I mean, they were never around. They were out working or always somewhere else. That's why we call ourselves the mothers of Ituzaingó. Also, men are scared. We women are braver than men. Most of them would only get upset because we didn't have the dinner ready or the house was not cleaned. They would get angry with us.
No estaba limpio y sí se enojaban.
But the women were undeterred, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to stop chemicals being sprayed in their neighborhood. But this would have dangerous consequences for Sofia. She faced violence, humiliation, and tragedy to take her battle for the community's health all the way to the courts and started one of the longest-running sit-ins in Argentina. That's coming up when Outlook returns after the news.
This is the BBC World Service, and for World Book Club, Harriet Gilbert is talking to Charlotte Wood about her novel, The Weekend.
I wanted to write about women who were not defined by family.
It's the story of 3 women in their 70s who reunite to clear out their deceased friend's dilapidated beach house. But over a weekend of close confinement, tempers and the bonds of friendship starts to fray.
When I first published the book, people kept saying to me, are any of your friends still talking to you now? Because they assumed that they were based on people. All those women are in me. They're sort of aspects of myself. I'm having people write me very intense responses about how it's made them think about their own behaviour, that they understand something new about themselves and about others. And I find that sort of reader response, it's worth everything.
World